Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Big Ten, your daily podcast on the Big Ten Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today on the Locked On Big Ten podcast begins our look around the NFL and the NFL organizations that selected the Big Ten talent in the 2021 NFL Draft. And today we begin with the Baltimore Ravens, who selected 4 Big Ten players in the past 2021 NFL Draft, the team that I am dubbing officially the Big Ten's NFL team, the Baltimore Ravens. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Big Ten podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ben Stevens. May the 4th be with you on this Tuesday, May 4th, 2021. And joining us to talk all about Baltimore and the Big Ten's NFL team is the host of Locked On Ravens. It is Kevin Oestreicher, back on the podcast about a year ago this time. We did the same exact thing, talking about how the Ravens like to go into the pool of the Big Ten talent to select for their NFL organization. So, Kevin, a pleasure to have you back on the podcast.
Yeah, Ben, absolutely. The Ravens love their Big Ten players. They have the Harbaugh connection in Michigan. And obviously, they got a lot of big playmakers in the Big Ten in this draft.
So, you lead me into my first question for you, because this is the second straight year we are talking about this idea that a lot of Big Ten players, and the Ravens selected 4 in the 2021 NFL Draft, are now a part of the Baltimore Ravens organization. And you allude to that Harbaugh connection. Of course, Jim Harbaugh, the head coach of Michigan, John Harbaugh, the head coach of the Baltimore Ravens. Is there some credence to that they do a lot of scouting within the Big Ten Conference, that year after year the Ravens like to go to the Big Ten to make their NFL selections?
Yeah, Ben, I think they do. And the whole thing with the Harbaugh connection, I mean, it's real. Like, it actually is a thing that the Ravens take into consideration. They obviously take the word of Jim Harbaugh very seriously. And with John, during his post-draft press conference here in 2021 after the pick of Ben Mason, which was a bit of an interesting one for a lot of fans. I don't think a lot of people were necessarily too happy with it. But he said that Ben Mason was a favorite of his parents. And It was something pretty interesting, because usually family ties don't really go into draft decisions, but you literally have a head coach of an NFL team and the head coach of a really prominent college program. You know, Jim Harbaugh probably, he does know a lot about these players. He recruits them. He works with them for however many years they're there, 3, 4. They value the word of Jim Harbaugh a ton, and that showed on draft weekend when they took Ben Mason, when they already have someone in Patrick Ricard, who pretty much, you can call Ben Mason a Patrick Ricard clone, Patrick Ricard a Ben Mason clone. I mean, really, it was a phenomenal draft for the Ravens, a big part due to the fact of these Big Ten prospects.
I mean, it's very funny that some Ravens fans might not be that fond of the Ben Mason pick out of Big Ten country. I think that's the most Big Ten pick you can have, selecting a fullback in the 2021 NFL Draft. And we'll dive through all 4 of the Ravens selections that they made out of the Big Ten Conference. And of course, we start with the first overall pick the Ravens made on Thursday night in that opening round, the wide receiver out of Minnesota, and Rashad Bateman at number 27 overall. Kevin, as I looked at the draft in total, not just the first round, not just of Big Ten talent, but in total, I think that Rashad Bateman selection to Baltimore at number 27 was one of my favorites. What did you like about that pick, bringing in Rashad Bateman?
Yeah, Ben, I loved it. I love this pick. I think this was a situation where Rashad Bateman was, I think, the draft crush of so many Ravens fans throughout the past couple of months. All you saw, whether it was on Ravens Twitter, Ravens sites, was what is and who is this Rashad Bateman guy? And who he is I think he has the potential to become a number 1 wide receiver in Baltimore. Now, obviously, is not that right now. Is going to have to develop a bit more. But I think he's one of the more well-rounded prospects in this draft, can play both outside and inside. Although, honestly, I think Baltimore's going to put him more on the outside, because they have good inside options already. Marquise Brown, Devin Duvernay, James Prochet. Bateman, there were reports of Bateman playing at Minnesota at 6'2", 6'3". He's not that tall. He's more 6 feet, 6'1". And he said that. He's like, I don't know where these reports came from. I'm not that tall. But it doesn't matter. He gets up for the football. He catches contested balls really well. Strong hands. Such a sharp route runner, too. I mean, when the Ravens were on the clock, a lot of people really didn't know what they were going to do with their pick. There were plenty of options out there, some of which who fell to the second round and really deep into the second round. Players like Christian Barmore, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, Tevin Jenkins was there as well. But Baltimore is going all out to get Lamar Jackson his weapons, and Bateman was one of my favorite receivers in the class. Obviously, the team probably didn't have enough ammunition to go up there and trade for a Jamar Chase or even a Jalen Waddle or Devonta Smith. But now what you have is a guy in Bateman who has that star power, gives you what you need, won't wow anybody with speed, but they don't need him to because they have the speedsters already. He's a big compliment to what they already have on the roster. And that's the most important part to me is how does this guy fit with the Ravens? How does he fit into their scheme? He seems excited to be in Baltimore, excited to play with Lamar Jackson. I mean, this was a home run in my opinion.
And Kevin, you mentioned giving Lamar Jackson those weapons on the outside. Do you think Rashad Bateman will be a day one starter for the Baltimore Ravens?
You know, he might not be listed on the depth chart as a starter, but I think he gets big snaps. I think the Ravens took him in the 2021 draft, especially so early, to play in this offense. Now, obviously, the team did sign Sammy Watkins in for agency. That helps from a veteran perspective, but honestly, you know, the stuff that I've been saying for a very long time on Locked On Ravens is the fact that a star is a star no matter what age they are. It does, you know, Justin Jefferson came into the league last year and lit the world on fire. So Bateman has the potential, especially in an offense that I think is going to be throwing the football more in 2021 than they did in 2020, to go out there and produce big numbers, especially now with Watkins and Marquise Brown, who I think is a better slot option than on the outside. Now you get to play guys in positions where they're more comfortable. And I think that opens up the offense even more. So Bateman, you know, the Ravens might list Marquise Brown and Sammy Watkins as the true actual starters on the depth chart, but I think Bateman will be getting starter snaps in Baltimore. And it might not be early. Baltimore has this thing where they, unless it's like a star player, so Bateman does fall under this category, they don't necessarily play rookies early on. It's been something that's been pretty well noted. J.K. Dobbins barely got any playing time over the first 6-7 weeks of the season before really ramping it up in the final 9-10. So Bateman, you know, it might take a couple weeks for him to ease into those full-on, you know, starter snaps, but he'll get his snaps in Baltimore.
And this is why I call the Baltimore Ravens the Big Ten's NFL team, is because just 4 picks later, the second to last pick of that first round, the Ravens selected Odafe Oweh, who was known by Jason during his time in state college for the Penn State Nittany Lions. Now is going by his true first name in Odafe Oweh. They selected him number 31 overall. Where do you see Odafe functioning in for that Baltimore Ravens defense?
Yeah, he's someone who definitely the first thing when you look at him is he has elite athletic traits. And that's where the Ravens are banking this pick on, the potential that Oweh has. And for the Ravens, they needed edge help. You know, that wasn't a mystery. The Ravens lost Matthew Judon and Yannick Ngakoue and Jihad Ward in free agency. They only entered this draft with 3 edge rushers on their roster. They'll probably keep 5 or 6. So the selection of an edge rusher was not a surprise. Oweh in particular, he's very raw. I think a lot of people point to the lack of production is something where that's a concern to them. And, you know, if he's not getting to the quarterback in the Big Ten, then, you know, can he do it at the NFL level? Can he get the quarterback down? But I think this is a pick where the Ravens can afford to be a little bit patient with Oweh as a pass rusher. He sets the edge very well, very good in run defense, and an overall disruptor, which is, I think, very valuable, especially at the NFL level, because edge rushers, the responsibilities of them, I think a common misconception of that is, you know, they're rushing the passer, they're getting 10 sacks or 15 sacks, and that's it. That's what constitutes a star. But in reality, these guys, they can drop back into coverage. They can defend the run really well. There's more to an edge rusher than just rushing the passer. And Oweh showed at Penn State that he can get to the quarterback. He just never really got the quarterback on the ground. So Ravens fans have had a bit of a, you know, hot and cold relationship with the whole pressure thing. You know, it's obviously one thing to disrupt the quarterback, but it's a whole nother thing to actually get them down on the ground and, you know, have that yardage lost. So there's going to be a bit of development with Oweh for sure, but he can come in and provide some good snaps for the Ravens early. I think that it was a good pick for them. There maybe were a couple of other picks I would have taken over him, but I'm not mad at this pick at all. I think it was a good investment of a first rounder. The Ravens have had some nice success stories developing later round edge rusher. So now with the talent that Oweh has and him being a first rounder, I mean, the sky's the limit.
You mentioned the potential for Oweh, the athletic traits for Oweh. I think a lot of jaws were dropped onto the floor during Penn State's pro day when 6'5", 255 Odafe Oweh ran a 4.35 40. So the talent and athleticism is certainly there. The second to last pick of the first round. The second pick the Baltimore Ravens made in as many picks out of the Big Ten Conference. Thus, we were speaking with Kevin Oestreicher, the host of Locked On Ravens, talking about Baltimore being the Big Ten's NFL team. So, Kevin, the next pick that the Ravens made out of the Big Ten Conference was an intriguing one, I think, in the 5th round, going with Shaun Wade, the cornerback out of Ohio State, the Big Ten cornerback of the season in 2020, a guy that had a lot of notoriety to his name, but didn't have the best production in 2020. What did you make of that pick for the Ravens taking Shaun Wade in the 5th round?
Yeah, honestly, Ben, I think this was another great one for them. The Ravens definitely needed nickel cornerback help. Tavon Young, their star slot cornerback, is a great player, but had suffered 3 season-ending injuries in his first 5 years in the NFL. So, unfortunately, you can't really rely on the health of a guy who has that injury history. Now, Wade has kind of an interesting story. Obviously, a phenomenal 2019 year. He opts out of the 2020 season and says, hey, all right, I'm going to prepare for the 2021 draft, and, we're going to do what we can to get my draft stock up. And then he comes back and he moves to the outside. And that effectively tanks his draft stock to where the Ravens were able to snag him at pick 160. I mean, honestly, Ben, if he came out or if he was able to prepare and just didn't come back for the 2020 year, he could have been probably a first rounder, at the very latest, a second rounder. But I think that the Ravens, they get a steal here because of that fact, because the Ravens aren't going to ask him to play outside in their defense. They have Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, Jimmy Smith, Anthony Averett is someone who came on last year. So what they can do is develop Wade behind Tavon Young. And if Young does go down with another injury, unfortunately, it's not likely, but it's possible due to his medical concerns and medical history, the Ravens can insert Wade. And I think this was a big pick for them because what they usually did in this situation was move outside corner Marlon Humphrey in. They moved him inside. And Humphrey's a phenomenal slot cornerback himself. He pretty much learned to play the position, on a whim because the Ravens literally had no options to do so. They didn't have any good options. But Humphrey's a better corner on the outside. So what this affords Baltimore to do is if Wade can return to what he was doing in 2019 and get back to his 2019 form, even if Young goes down, the Ravens can still leave Humphrey on the outside and be comfortable with who they have on the inside.
I think you bring up a great point right there. Shaun Wade got his notoriety as that slot nickelback defender for the Ohio State Buckeyes defense that was very prominent in 2019 because they had Jeff Okudah and Damon Arnett, 2 first-round selections in the 2020 NFL draft on the outside. So Shaun Wade being able to move back where he's probably more comfortable on that inside slot cornerback position is tremendous value for the Baltimore Ravens. So I ask you, Kevin, a follow-up there about Shaun Wade. What do you think his upside is for that Ravens defense?
I think in a few years he could be a star. I know that maybe that will cause a little bit of roster, more of a crunch with Tavon Young in there because ideally, you want to have as many star players on both sides of the ball as you can, but then it becomes a money issue. And with Lamar Jackson coming up with his big extension, a couple other guys now having their extensions kick in, the Ravens probably can't afford to keep 2-star slot corners. So if Tavon Young, the Ravens restructured Young's contract for this upcoming year due to probably his medical concerns. When that contract is up, and if Wade shows that he has the potential or has already blossomed into a really good slot cornerback, they could say, all right, we have a better option, a younger and cheaper option here. Tavon Young, this has been great, but, we're going to do the business decision, which is an unfortunate part of the NFL business because, Tavon Young is a big part of the Ravens culture and what he does. But I think Wade has tremendous upside in this defense, particularly because he's playing alongside phenomenal defensive backs. I mentioned Humphrey and Peters. Smith probably won't be around for too much longer, but even so, the Ravens might actually try to kind of work with Wade and see what he can do at free safety as well. I think that, the positional versatility that he offers could be really enticing to them. And they love their positionless defense. They put guys all over the field. I mean, the first drive of their 2020 season, Calais Campbell, this, monster defensive lineman, drops back into coverage and almost intercepts Baker Mayfield. So they literally put anybody anywhere. So what they could do with Wade is they could move him around. They could put him at nickel corner. They can move him to free safety a bit, kind of work him around in the defense, see where he best fits, and then go from there. So he's not really locked into one position, in my opinion. I think he has upside at multiple.
And that's why I think you could make the argument that's about as enticing of a pick as you will find in the 5th round at number 160 overall to get Shaun Wade out of Ohio State. So a guy we talked about at the top of this conversation, the pick that I would claim is the most Big Ten of all the Big Ten selections that the Baltimore Ravens made in the 2021 NFL Draft, the fullback out of Michigan in Ben Mason. Kevin, you mentioned that a couple of Ravens fans maybe weren't so thrilled with the selection late in the 5th round, but where do you think Ben Mason has a spot on the Baltimore Ravens roster?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because first of all, a lot of people are saying, "Oh, they're just going to cut him out of training camp. Like this was a waste." I don't think so. I think he's here to stay. And the reason one, I talked about the Harbaugh connection and that Mason was a favorite of John Harbaugh's parents, but really what I think here is the Ravens. It was on the draft coverages. He was listed as a tight end, and that was interesting because primarily he was that H-back, fullback type player who could play on the defensive side of the ball. Literally, what Patrick Ricard does for this team. but Ricard is a free agent after the end of the 2021 season. And if they decide that Patrick Ricard is, again, too expensive for them and they think that Mason can fill his role, or he does end up showing in 2021 that he can fill that role, it might be another situation like Tavon Young where they say, hey, Patrick Ricard, this was great, but we have a younger, cheaper option. You're demanding too much money for us here. We just can't do it. So with Mason in 2021, where he fits, the Ravens could do a lot. 2 fullback looks. Like, what would that look like on the field with 2 H-backs in line? You could use Mason as the third tight end in line there on the formation next to Mark Andrews and Nick Boyle. Mason had that weird usage pattern where I think he had around 30 carries his sophomore season, then had like 12 in the remainder of his 3 seasons, only 3 catches. But he's a good short yardage guy. He loves the hurdling, and I think that fits in phenomenally with what the Ravens already do, because Mark Andrews and Nick Boyle are the hurdle masters of the NFL. I feel like they run drills for that in practice. But what you have is a guy who can fill a bunch of different roles. And again, I mentioned the positionless defense. Well, the Ravens, I think they're going to throw the football a little bit more in 2021, as I talked about, than in 2020. I mean, Mason could be a guy who, it's injury insurance. It's more of a developmental picks, kind of see what they have in him. If he doesn't end up panning out, they have Ricard who they can fall back on. And, having a Pro Bowl guy is a pretty good option to fall back on. But Mason, I think, is going to be developed more along the 3 tight end sets. He's going to be developed more as a tight end, play some fullback as well. But I think the Ravens are really high on the pick. And, based off of what they did in this draft, again, they love their athletic testers. I think only one of their players didn't really impact anything athletically, and that was Tylan Wallace. That was a more best player available pick. All these guys, Mason included, have great athletic traits. I think they're going to try to hone in on those with all their picks and see what they can do.
And Ben Mason certainly subscribes to one of Jim Harbaugh's biggest credos, and that being that the human body craves contact. Ben Mason will go through any hole and blast anybody there if they're available to do so. I also love Patrick Ricard. After the draft selection was made by the Baltimore Ravens on day number 3, he tweeted out the Spider-Man gif of Ben Mason and Patrick Ricard pointing at each other. A little bit of fun. And if they do that 2 H-back setup, that will be the most Big Ten formation you will possibly see in all of the National Football League. So I would love it. Kevin, you're telling me that the Harbaugh parents were instrumental in getting Ben Mason to Baltimore?
I don't want to call it instrumental, but they certainly had an impact. Harbaugh shared that during his post-draft press conference. He thought it was good enough information to put out there to the world. So I think that they had some influence in this selection. Now, obviously, I don't think they had the final say. But what you saw was, the Big Ten connection with the Harbaughs. And obviously Jim probably had some nice things to say. We've seen that over the years with a couple of the Ravens picks. But I think the Ravens in all, and when you look at the Big Ten Conference as a whole, obviously with the whole COVID-shortened season for college football and everything going on with the NFL and with the NCAA, I think that with Baltimore, they were looking more into the Power 5 conferences and seeing that with their selections, they were kind of looking at those conferences every single time. The Ravens love their small school guys, but I think with just the lack of information on smaller school programs, smaller conferences, the Ravens wanted to trust the film and trust the tape that they had in the bigger ones to be able to be, I guess, a little bit more sure of what they were doing, who they were selecting. And I think they put even more into the Harbaugh connection this year than other years because they had that, direct pipeline in there to the head coach of a huge college program. And I think that was the case with a lot of teams, honestly, just because with the COVID-shortened seasons across a lot of different conferences, it provided some challenges, especially, the combine not really being there, having all these different pro days. It was an interesting year, and I think this was a year where the NFL really looked to those bigger conferences, the Big Ten really a beneficiary of that, although they have plenty of players drafted every year. I don't think they needed that to really get their numbers up. But yeah, there were a lot of good prospects in the Big Ten and across the rest of the Power 5 conferences.
And I think you can trust in that Harbaugh pipeline because not just Jim and John, obviously, but their father, Jack, a large coaching pedigree through many, many years of experience for Jack Harbaugh. So if he says he likes Ben Mason, probably the style of football that he was coaching in the 70s and 80s, then hey, maybe you take a flyer on Ben Mason, the fullback out of Michigan, for that 5th round. So Kevin, as you know, of course, everybody in the Big Ten country has their favorite NFL teams, but I will be rooting for the Baltimore Ravens at least a little bit because they keep going to the Big Ten and they keep drafting some of its best talent. So I have a little bit of a fandom for the Baltimore Ravens now. We appreciate your insight and expertise. Kevin Oestreicher, the host of Locked On Ravens, breaking down what the Big Ten guys will most likely do for Baltimore, the Big Ten's NFL team. Kevin, thank you so much for your time.
Ben, I think we may be doing this again next year around this time based off of what we've been seeing with the Baltimore Ravens. So it's always a pleasure.
Kevin, I will see you in early May of 2022. Sounds like a date.
Absolutely.